Hey everyone, Chrissy at Pinovate. This tutorial is for our awesome garden sign and garden stake kit that we have collaborated with Lines by Lacey for. And it is so cute, it's absolutely adorable, it's very customizable, and will look perfect in your garden this year. So follow along and we'll make this together. Okay, so let's go through all of your supplies because there is a lot in here. You are going to get 11 wooden stakes, as well as a wooden rectangle for the sign, some sandpaper, outdoor selection of paint, a paintbrush and a makeup sponge, some nails to assemble your sign, your selection of vinyl, and the only other things that you're going to need would be a hammer and some sort of a scraper like a rewards card or a library card. So let's get all of your supplies together and we'll get started. So to get started on our project, our first step is to sand all of our wood. So our sign as well as all of our 11 stakes. We want to make sure that everything is nice and soft to the touch. There's no slivers along the edges. That just preps everything for the paint to go on smoothly and for our project to turn out really, really well. So with your sandpaper, you're just going to sand all of the sides of all of your pieces of wood. So I just finished sanding and you will end up with a lot of dust on your area. So it is a lot of wood to sand and there will be a lot of dust. So what I just did was I just took a paper towel or a dry cloth and I just wanted to wipe everything off to get rid of that dust before we start painting. We just want to make sure that this is prepped properly before that paint goes on. So once it is all dusted off, we are ready to go. Okay, so we are ready to paint. You have a selection of paint that you have chosen. Now this paint is outdoor paint, so it is meant to be outside. It's perfect for your garden and this project. So I'm gonna use both colors. I'm gonna paint my stakes white and I'm gonna paint my sign the opposite, just so you can see the difference. Okay, so a few tips and tricks. I'm gonna start with my white. We only wanna do a small amount on our wood. So we wanna do a nice thin flat layer, let it dry, and then do a second coat. So if we have too much paint on there, it's not going to dry properly. We want to just make sure that it is nice and flat, give it a nice even coat all the way around. So if you have to paint one side, let it dry, and then flip it to the other side. That is a great little tip. But we want to make sure that it is fully covered. And again, just a little bit of paint at a time. We can always go back in and add more. And I'm just doing nice long strokes to make sure that that wood is covered. Making sure I get the edges as well. Okay, so I have one coat on my stake. I'm gonna let that dry and then do a second coat. If you would like to speed up the drying process, you can actually use a hair dryer for this. Give it a quick little minute under that and it will dry very quickly, and then you can go ahead and do your second coat. So I have finished one of my stakes. There are 2 coats on here. I have covered every single section of it. It is nice and dry. And you want to make sure that you do this to all of your stakes, okay? So 2 coats, both sides, all of the edges. And then once that's done, we'll move on to our board. So 10 of your stakes are for your garden, your fruit and your vegetables. And you should have 1 stake left over for your sign that we need to nail onto the back at the very end. Okay, so I'm going to paint my board my opposite color just so you can see the difference. So again, this is the exact same procedure. You want to paint all the surfaces, the front, the back, the top, the sides, everything. So exactly the same way, taking a little bit of paint, covering your board, making sure it is nice and flat. And then you want to let that dry before you add your second coat. All right, so for my sign, I have 2 coats on my board on the front, the edges, and the back, and it is completely dry. I made sure that it was dry in between putting my coats on, just to make sure that it had the nicest finish possible. So this next step is optional. You do not have to do this if you don't want to, but if you would like to give it more of a rustic, weathered look, because these are going to be outside in your garden, all you're going to do is take your sandpaper and just kind of scuff up around the edges so it has a little bit of a worn look to it. So I have scuffed up my board. It has a nice little weathered look to it. Now, because I am sanding off paint, it is going to get quite messy. So again, with a dry paper towel, I'm just going to dust everything off and clean off my table before the next step. So the next step is to start applying our vinyl to all of our wooden pieces. So I'm going to start with my big board. Now, we have this amazing Welcome to Our Garden vinyl, and with this step, you're going to need a scraper of some sort. So this is where a bank card or a library card or rewards card will come in very handy. If you don't have any of those, you can also use a butter knife. You just want something with a nice flat edge. So our vinyl comes in 3 pieces. There's a backing, there's our black vinyl, and then there's a clear piece of transfer tape on top as well. So this is kind of a 3-step process to get this over onto our board. So the first step is we are going to scrape everything down. So we want to make sure that our vinyl is sticking to our clear transfer tape. We want to take that paper backing off. So I want to get out all of the air bubbles. Making sure I scrape everything down. All right, so I've scraped that. Now what I want to do is peel off this paper backing. So as I grab this corner, I'm going to just start peeling very carefully. And crossing my fingers, everything will stick to the clear. If it does not, if you start having pieces that come off on the paper, you're just going to press them down again, give it another rub, and try it again. So you'll have to have patience with this. It might take a few minutes, but we want to make sure everything is sticking to that clear transfer tape. All right, so I now have a very sticky piece of vinyl. That paper backing is gone. Now what I need to do is flip this over and place it right onto my board. So I want to do my best to try and line it up, make sure nothing is overhanging. Do my best to get it somewhat centered. All right, so once I'm happy with the placement, I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to scrape this down, and now my vinyl is going to stick to my board. Okay, now you want to make sure that this is stuck really well, because that's going to help prevent bleeding from sneaking under all of those little lines. So make sure that this is placed solidly down on your board, and once you're happy with that, we're going to peel back this clear transfer tape. So when you're peeling, instead of pulling up, you're actually just going to roll it back onto itself. And again, if any pieces start coming up, you're just going to give them another push back down. But we want everything to stick and this clear plastic transfer tape to come off. There we go. So I'm ready to paint. I'm going to be using my white paint on my green board, so it's going to pop and stand off, and I'm also going to be using a makeup sponge for this. So to paint this, vinyl, we want to actually do it in multiple layers with very little paint. If we put too much paint on here, there's a high chance that it's going to goop underneath and it's going to bleed under all of these fine details, and we don't want that. So what I'm going to do is take a tiny little bit of my paint, a very small amount, take most of it off, and then I'm going to go in there very gently and I'm dabbing up and down. Instead of swiping, painting left and right or up and down, I'm directly dabbing directly up and down. And I'm filling in all of those spaces with a very thin layer of paint. Once I have covered that, I'm gonna go in again and do a second layer. So less is more in this scenario. We do not want too much paint, otherwise there's a huge possibility that it's going to bleed, and it's just gonna help it dry nice and quickly if we use just very thin coats. So I finished my first coat. I'm gonna let this dry and then do a second coat. Okay, so I actually ended up doing 3 coats of white on mine. I just wanted it to have a nice, solid, even flow to it. So now it is dry, it's dry to the touch, and I'm ready to peel off my vinyl. So I'm just gonna take it, it's like a great big sticker or a Band-Aid, and you're just gonna peel this right off. But it's important that it is dry. If it is still wet, you're going to end up smearing paint all over your fingers and everywhere. So please make sure it is dry before you do this part. Now, so I have the outside done. I need to go into the inside. So I usually just use my fingernails, but you can also use tweezers or a toothpick or a bamboo skewer if that helps. But we just want to go in and start peeling out all of our little inside details. All right, so I've peeled everything off, and if there are any spaces where it has bled underneath or maybe peeled something off that you don't like, you can go in with a fine detail brush and just touch that up at this point. So now it's time to do the same process to our garden stakes. So the easiest way to do this is to have all of your stakes lined up, and they should all be pointing the same way at the bottom, so you know that everything is going to be facing the same side. From this point, you get to customize what you want on each stake. Is it a vegetable or a fruit, as well as what picture it is. So what you want to do is the exact same process as we did with this, with the vinyl. And what you're going to have is a picture of your image along with the name of it. Now, you also want to ensure that they are all saying the same thing, the same direction. We don't want to have one saying it this direction and then accidentally having one saying it this direction. So we want to make sure that everything is lined up the same way. So on my stake, I'm going to do carrots and vegetables. So I'm actually just going to go ahead and cut those out with a plain old pair of scissors. All right, so I have my vinyls on my stake. Before we start painting, you need to make sure that you have all of your stakes vinyled out. You need to have your image at the top and your word all facing the same direction, as well as your post the same direction at the bottom. Once all of your stakes are done with your vinyl and they're all lined up, you can paint them like an assembly line, and it goes really fast. All right, so now that all of your stakes are prepped, we are going to start painting. So now I am going to use my green paint on my white stake so it pops out. And it's the exact same fashion as before. You're using a makeup sponge, a tiny amount of paint, and you're dabbing straight up and down. So I have one coat on this steak. So what you want to do is do one coat on each of your steaks. Make sure they all have one coat solidly on there. And then once you come back to your first steak, it's going to be dry and you can go ahead and do a second coat. So it's going to be an awesome little system. Okay, so I have actually 3 coats of paint on here just to make sure that it is nice and solid. And we're going to peel off our vinyl like we did on our sign, just like a great big sticker. It should peel right off. And then we can go in and take out the insides of any of the letters. If there are any spots that have bled underneath at all, this is where you can go in and touch them up with a fine tip brush. So for my very last step of my whole kit, I want to assemble my sign. So I have my lone little steak left over and my sign. So what I want to do is flip this over, line this up in the middle, and then this is where you're going to need your hammer and your nails. So we are just going to directly nail this in the way down. So watch your fingers. And we should be all done our sign, all attached, ready for your garden. Thank you so much for following along our absolutely adorable little garden set. I bet your garden is gonna look sweet this year. We would love to see how they turned out, so please tag us on Instagram at Pinovate and DIY Delivery. And I want to send out a huge thank you to Lunds by Lacey for collaborating with us on this kit. It is superb. And if you have a chance, please follow us. We are on Facebook and YouTube, Instagram, all of the things. So a big thank you again, and we will see you later.